Will the U.S. be weaker in 2050 than today? The U.S. economy will be weaker in 2050. The bullish case here is that the American economy stands to benefit from an emerging cluster of technological innovations, including in biotech, energy, robotics, and space, with AI machine learning holding perhaps the most potential as a productivity-boosting general-purpose technology with impacts across business sectors: energy, finance, health, marketing, media, professional services, and retailing. As I noted in the previous issue of this newsletter, ChatGPT from Sam Altman's OpenAI is being tested by nuclear fusion startup Helion, also an Altman investment, to see if the large language model can accelerate engineering work. Then there are the early studies showing huge productivity gains in areas such as coding and customer service. But even before ChatGPT became a thing, machine learning was already being employed in areas such as drug discovery and materials science. And while technological progress may have its own inherent momentum, technology happens because it is possible. As Altman has put it, our actions matter. Are we going to think hard about the impacts of our investment, regulatory, and tax actions on innovation? If the U.S. economy is weaker a generation from now than it is today, America as a society will be able to look in the mirror to discover the reason why. The United States will be less important in the world. Compared to whom? Not Europe, which seems to view its comparative advantage as creating innovation-stifling regulation rather than creating new technologies and their commercial applications. If you look at the 25 largest technology companies by market cap, 18 are American, just 2 European, and none in the top 10. In terms of national wealth, America continues to extend its lead. From The Economist, income per person in America was 24% higher than in Western Europe in 1990 in PPP terms. Today it is about 30% higher. A trucker in Oklahoma can earn more than a doctor in Portugal. Britons, some of Europe's best-off inhabitants, spent 80% as much as Americans in 1990. By 2021 that was down to 69%. But won't America diminish in global power versus China? Consider this: China is facing a stark demographic near future with its current population perhaps falling by half over the few decades to 700 million from 1.4 billion. The working age population is already shrinking. And productivity growth? Moribund, thanks to its turn away from liberalization. Even if China can grow at 2 or 3% long term, concludes a recent report from Australia's Lowy Institute, it would never establish a meaningful lead, in economic size, over the United States and would remain far less prosperous and productive per person than America, even by mid-century. The country will be more politically divided. Here's an interesting hypothetical: what if the late 1990s economic optimists had been correct, and the internet bubble had turned into a lengthy economic and productivity boom as was seen in the immediate post-war decades? Remember, the U.S. productivity slowdown began before the global financial crisis. So, even assuming the GFC still happened, the post-GFC recovery might well have been much, much stronger under this scenario, and our politics less brutal. Sure, 1990s politics seemed pretty contentious at the time. I mean, the GOP-controlled House impeached President Clinton. Yet Clinton served 2 terms, including by a near landslide in 1996, and as 2000 began, 69% of us were satisfied with the direction of the country. Do you know what brings out the worst in us? Tough economic times. Financial crises, in particular, seem to be drivers of populism. So avoiding big financial shocks and deep recessions is a good thing, as is making sure the underlying economy maximizes its potential during the good times. Now, none of this is to say that rapid growth doesn't cause dislocation, creative destruction and all that. But this is another area for policy, whether it's better worker retraining, helping workers move to where the jobs are, or intervening to directly boost wages through earnings subsidies if we go through a period where automation has a large negative impact on labor markets. Most Americans predict a weaker economy and a greater national debt by 2050. The majority of Americans predict a weaker U.S. economy and a burgeoning national debt by 2050, according to a study by the Pew Research Center. The share of Americans who are dissatisfied with the way things are going in the country, 7 in 10 in January, is higher now than at any time in the past year, the researchers say. Republicans and Democrats were in agreement on their forecasts about the national debt, 64% and 63%, respectively, said it will grow. The majority of Americans predict a weaker U.S. economy and a burgeoning national debt by 2050, according to a study by the Pew Research Center. The researchers attribute economic fears to Americans' broader dissatisfaction with the country as a whole right now. Over half of those surveyed, 54%, believe that the U.S. economy will be weaker in the next 3 decades, compared with 38% who say it will be stronger. Similarly, 63% of Americans say the national debt will grow, compared with 16% of Americans who think it will be reduced or eliminated and 21% who say it will remain relatively the same. The majority of Americans predict a weaker U.S. economy and a burgeoning national debt by 2050, according to a study by the Pew Research Center. The researchers attribute economic fears to Americans' broader dissatisfaction with the country as a whole right now. Over half of those surveyed, 54%, believe that the U.S. economy will be weaker in the next 3 decades, compared with 38% who say it will be stronger. Similarly, 63% of Americans say the national debt will grow, compared with 16% of Americans who think it will be reduced or eliminated and 21% who say it will remain relatively the same. These grim predictions mirror, in part, the public's sour mood about the current state of the country, wrote the authors of the study, which was released Thursday. The share of Americans who are dissatisfied with the way things are going in the country, 7 in 10 in January of 2019, is higher now than at any time in the past year. Fears over the economy also coincide with recent projections by the Federal Reserve, which downgraded its estimate for U.S. economic growth this year to just 2.1% from 2.3% on Wednesday. Fed officials cited an economic slowdown here and abroad as reason to downgrade their growth outlook. Harry Holzer, professor of public policy at Georgetown University and former chief economist for the Department of Labor, said the fear for a bright economic future is staring Americans right in the face. The historical trend, where each generation has done better than the previous one, hasn't been true recently, Holzer said. People's pessimism is grounded in some economic reality. Rich Morin, co-author of the Pew study, reaffirmed this sentiment. These results likely represent the current anxieties of the economy and the current performance of the economy, said Morin. Contrasting Americans' fears and the Federal Reserve's estimates, the White House predicts 3.2% economic growth this year. President Donald Trump pledged on the campaign trail that he would eliminate the nation's debt, but instead it has increased. The total outstanding public debt was $22.01 trillion in February, up from $19.95 trillion when Trump took office on January 20, 2017. Pew found that white Americans are more pessimistic than African Americans or Hispanics about the country's future fiscal health. 57% of whites compared with 48% of African Americans and 43% of Hispanics predict a weaker economy in 2050. There's also substantial divide in economic sentiment between political parties. Nearly 6 in 10 Democrats predict a weaker economy versus roughly half of Republicans. Across socioeconomic status, approximately half or more of every income group predict a weaker economy in the next 30 years. Sentiment was roughly the same across race and socioeconomic status concerning the country's national debt. However, about the same number of Republicans as Democrats forecast a growing national debt, 64% and 63%. Researchers say the bipartisan agreement stands in sharp contrast with nearly every other question throughout the study. I'm not surprised by the pessimism because if you look at the numbers, the debt has been rising for a long time, said Holzer. Since 2000, the national debt to GDP ratio has been gradually increasing. It's also worth noting that current public sentiment is not indicative of future outcomes. These results likely reflect current anxieties. It doesn't mean that there will be major shifts in policy and the debt will grow smaller, said Morin.